Well, I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. We'll get started. My name is Dean Cavaretta, and I am a member of Common Core Forum.org group, and we are a nonpartisan, all-volunteer, statewide organization that was formed not too long ago, founded by a former school committee member from Worcester, Donna Calorio. And our mission was to get the word out on what a friend of ours has said is probably one of the largest changes to public education policy in our nation's history. We'd have to go back maybe to the 1965 Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 to see something quite as dramatic, which is going on now with Common Core and with PARCC. So our group is made up of former and current educators, school committee members, parents, and activists across the political spectrum to get the word out on what's happening to education here in Massachusetts and the dramatic changes that have taken place. A lot of what's happened is not as newsworthy as, say, Obamacare or the wars in the Middle East or the many other issues that are going on. But the issues are very profound. When you factor in that school spending, on average, is 2/3 of all localities' budgets. We are talking about a major, major issue, not only for communities here in the northern Essex area, but across the Commonwealth. And that is the situation right now. I am a certified high school history teacher. I probably went through many of the rigorous coursework that Dr. Stotsky laid out for us back in the 90s, but I'm the better teacher for it. I taught at the Acton Boxborough Public Schools in Concord, Carlisle. I'm originally from Metro West. I'm doing something a little bit different this semester. I'm teaching English as a second language in the city of Worcester. So many, many teachers are experiencing and on the receiving end of what we call PARCC, which is the new high-stakes pilot exam in Common Core, which is the curriculum. Now, we're going to have several guest speakers here tonight. I just wanted to make sure that we have thanked everybody. I want to thank Scott Falla and Aaron Budd and other organizers for this event, along with our Common Core Forum Steering Committee. Everyone pitched in, and we have had several events throughout the year in all parts of the state. I know back last winter we were up in Tewksbury, Dr. Stotsky and I, along with Jamie Gass from Pioneer Institute. So we've covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time, and the main goal is to get current and usable information out to you so you can go ahead and tell your friends and colleagues what's going on here in Massachusetts. So before I hand it off to Dr. Stotsky, I just want to say a couple more things. The Common Core initiative, if fully implemented, will federalize our public educational system. Although Massachusetts is currently the leader in standardized student test results with the MCAS, Common Core will eliminate local school control and place it with federal control over curriculum. Massachusetts will spend millions of dollars to lower its already high standards. It will increase dramatically the data collection and the monitoring of students, and it will dramatically impact teachers entering the profession. So there are many things to talk about tonight. We're going to try to cut through some of what you've heard, separate fact from fiction, and with that we'll get to our featured speaker. So Dr. Stotsky, Sandra Stotsky, is a retired professor of ed reform from the University of Arkansas. She is credited with developing one of the country's strongest set of academic standards for K-12 students, as well as the strongest academic standards and licensure tests for prospective teachers, while serving as a senior associate commissioner in the Massachusetts Department of Education from 1999 to 2003. She is also known nationwide for her in-depth analysis of the problems in Common Core's English language arts standards. Her current research ranges from the deficiencies in teacher preparation programs and teacher licensure tests to the deficiencies in the K-12 reading curriculum and the question of gender bias in the curriculum, all of which she'll be happy to comment on tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Sandra Stotsky.
begin. Is this mic up? Okay. I'd like to begin with just a 4-minute interview with me that appeared this morning, very serendipitously. I was asked yesterday afternoon if I wanted to be on Jean Levangi's program, because last week they had Mitchell Chester talking about PARCC, and they thought they needed to balance in some way what he said with what a critic, and I was the first critic apparently that was recommended. So I would like to have you take a look at this, because I managed to get in 4 minutes quite a bit, which I can do, and then bounce off of that for my regular remarks. So why don't you...
Is a test worth teaching to? That's what Education Commissioner Mitchell Chester said to us last week about PARCC, the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness in College. 10th graders still need to take the MCAS. How does it differ from an MCAS? And I know you think MCAS is a better test and a better way of measuring success, correct?
MCAS is better because it's based on first-rate standards. I helped to develop them when I was in the department, so I know how good they are. And MCAS is a much better test, also because it was developed by teachers here in Massachusetts, not by somebody else elsewhere. Part of our problem with PARCC is that we don't know who's developed it and where the cut score or pass score is going to be.
There are a lot of communities, I think 180, that are doing PARCC. Another 130-something are staying with MCAS. Of those, like the city of Boston, who are saying, okay, we'll do PARCC, what do you think they're missing? What do they not get?
They are missing a chance to have continuity with the MCAS tests that they've had, the trend lines, from using MCAS. Plus, they are betting on the wrong horse, to bring in a racing analogy here, because Common Core is dying now. Everyone knows that across this country. Waves of parents and teachers and unions are now coast to coast rising up against these Gates-funded standards that they never had any.
So PARCC, in your opinion, is a step back, not a step forward.
It's a step backward, but it's a step into blackness, because no one knows what's on the test, who's vetting it. It certainly isn't being vetted in Massachusetts by our own folks.
Mitchell Chester is the Commissioner of Education. He's also on the board of PARCC.
He chairs.
You see this as a conflict of interest, even though he's been cleared by the State Ethics Committee and the Secretary of Education?
It's a conflict of professional interest. How can he possibly recommend next year to the State Board of Ed that they don't adopt the PARCC test when he is chairing the governing board of the PARCC test? No, we need to have the legislature appoint an independent group of higher ed experts and testing experts to look at the data from the PARCC test, pilot tests that have been given this year, and to look at the results of MCAS. Remember, MCAS is given in grade 10, PARCC is going to be given in grade 11. So you're going to want to expect the PARCC test to have much higher standards and results.
And lastly, Dr., if it were up to you, would you change MCAS? If it's not broke, don't fix it, because as you were saying, the state has done very well, and when we compare ourselves to other cities, states, countries even, we fare pretty well.
We have. We got first place on NAEP, which is National Assessment of Educational Progress Test, grade 4, grade 8, reading, math. Can't do better than that. And we were tied for first place in science on an international test. Can't do better than that either. So why are we junking what we did well by? And there's no evidence that Common Core is anywhere close to being as good, nor that the PARCC tests are anywhere as good as MCAS, because I know the teachers that were creating the MCAS tests, first-rate teachers in the state.
Dr. Sandra Stotsky, thanks so much for coming in this morning. We appreciate your insight. Thanks so much. We'll continue the Fox 25 morning news at this moment.
Okay, that's how you get a lot in 4 minutes. I wanted to bounce off of the statement that I made at the very beginning. Oh, right. All right. I go right into this. Is this?
This point.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's going to be close.
All right. I can't hear any echo. All right. Why are they the wrong standards? Let me begin with a very quick overview, which I have often done. But let me begin first by saying that it is amazing in some ways that we ended up with the wrong standards, but you have to understand who was not participating in the development of these standards. There were 4 groups that I point out were not involved in the development of the original standards, standards writers, or on the validation committee. And first of all were parents. They were nowhere to be seen, and apparently they have not been particularly of interest to Gates, who has funded just about everything that moves in education, but couldn't figure out how to reach individual parents in the schools. And teachers were among the last to be notified. It was news to them when they finally discovered that they were going to have a complete change of everything. Third major group, which is why I have been testifying in over 25 states in the country, were state legislators. Started 2 years ago. They were beginning to hear rumblings from their constituents, and they wanted to know what was Common Core, because their own governor and state board of ed had not bothered to let them know what it was, but there were huge costs coming with technology. And so I had to start explaining to them what it was before they could then try to ask some intelligent questions. And the fourth group that was absent were local school boards. They still have almost as much power as they had 300 years ago. They just don't know it because in many states they have been treated so summarily that they think that they no longer have any legal authority over local schools, even though they are elected and according to our basic political principles still have the legal authority for policy making at the local level. State boards don't. The only teeth state boards generally have in statute. There are a few exceptions across the states, but the main exception is the requirement that the state board can decide upon a test that has to be administered by a local school district. However, the statute rarely, if at all, says that kids must take it. It simply means that the schools must offer it. So parents have been opting out all over the place, and in some cases trying to ask for permission, and I have been telling them that they've never needed permission. For 400 years, parents have never needed permission to keep their child at home, keep them out of school if they wanted to, send in an excuse note. I live in a town where parents regularly took their kids out vacations, sent in notes to the school. Parents have always had that right. That they have the right to homeschool their kids. So they don't need to ask the schools for permission to keep their kids out. They do need to petition. This is one of the words of advice I now give. If they want to send their kid to school on a day that there is Common Core-based testing, they can request the school board to vote for instructional time, not testing time. This is something that is going to need to be developed more, and in a few states there are now lawsuits that sort of touch upon this issue. What should be the policy of local school boards with parents who want to send their kids to school but don't want them locked up in a closet during the day while the testing is going on for the others? But you had these 4 major groups who were excluded for the most part from the development of Common Core standards. Who were on the original standards group? Mainly people connected to the testing industry, as I discovered. A few others, but mainly people connected to testing. And then who are the standards writers? Good part of our problem with the wrong standards is that we had, for the most part, unqualified people writing standards. They had not taught in K-12 for the most part. There was one exception on the math, but that's about it. There were some other issues with qualifications. These people were totally unknown to the field. No one in either math or English language arts or reading knew anything about any of the standards writers. They were totally unknown. They had not published in the area of education. They had no familiarity with curriculum and instruction. So we ended up with a peculiar set of standards that, if you take a look at a document that you can find on many websites, including my own, about the missing or delayed standards in math and in English, you will see that there are missing standards, whether they're missing deliberately or missing because it wasn't really known to the standards writers that they should have something to say about them, or, as I say, it was deliberate in the sense that they weren't aiming in ELA or anything below a skill level. That has not come out in 5 years. This is 5 years later. So things that have not come out in 5 years means that there were some things that we really need to find out but can't, because the standards were developed by private groups, supported by a private foundation, and nothing is available by FOIA. I've tried. I've asked reporters to try. How much were they paid? What was their charge? No information is available. Professor Milgram and I have been asking for 5 years to find out why there is no third pathway in calculus in the math standards. We still don't know 5 years later why there is no third pathway. That was the nickname for standards that would go from a weak algebra 2 to a calculus course, whether it's in grade 12 or college. But the point is, 5 years have passed, no one's offered reasons, and we can't ourselves get them. And he and I were on the validation committee, and we were the 2 experts on this committee of about 30, whose charge, that was the 3rd major committee formed by the Common Core project. And the purpose of the committee, as its name suggests, was to ensure that Common Core standards were internationally benchmarked, research-based, rigorous. He looked at the math, I looked at the English. We used to talk to each other because we couldn't figure out what was going on. We independently concluded that we could not sign off on these standards, as did 3 other people, for those reasons. And to this day, there have been squabbles and, unfortunately, a problem with forked tongues, in which we are regularly told by U.S. Chamber of Commerce and other groups that the standards are internationally based and they're rigorous, and Professor Milgram says they're not rigorous because look at all the math that they leave out. And this is going to make a difference for students going to STEM careers. I won't talk very much about math, but I urge you to take a look. I urge you to take a look at the missing math standards that Professor Milgram has vetted, put together, because you need to ask your high school principal and high school math and science department how they are going to handle, address these missing math standards so that students in your high schools will be able to get to the freshman coursework that is needed for 4-year STEM degree programs. That would be mathematics, science, engineering, economics, finance, and maybe others. A lot hinges on that if indeed we want more 4-year STEM majors. Now, one person I know has said, oh, so they'll spend 6 years. They'll make up the math when they get there. Well, we don't know who's going to pay for the extra 2 years. But this becomes a parent problem or somebody's problem. But it's something that parents or others can ask their own superintendents and math and science departments, because science piggybacks on math, and one of the things we know is that if the math isn't there, the science may not be there either in the 11th and 12th grade. What kind of coursework we expect prospective doctors, scientists, and others to be able to take if we want to have them coming from our own schools. I'm only going to say a few more words now, because I'd like to have more questions coming from the audience, about in relation to this little interview, why did Massachusetts give up what it had, which were among the best sets of standards in the country? California had among the best in math and science. That was why Professor Milgram was on the validation committee. He was one of the 4 mathematicians at Stanford who helped to write their math standards. As I say, I was the English language arts standards expert because I had not only helped to develop ours, but had helped achieve with its American diploma project exit standards for English language arts and several other states. So I was the expert on ELA standards. He was the expert on K-12 math standards. We didn't sign off, 3 others didn't, but the others, perhaps 24 people, and I've been asked about them recently, why did they sign off? We don't know, and it's probably good for people to look at what their affiliations are and to figure out whether they're in positions where it would not be appropriate for them to not sign off if they get grants from the government or if they are expecting to have contracts in some way. One of them was the head of assessment with WestEd, a test assessment firm. So you can sort of hypothesize that there are reasons why a number of people might have signed on, even if they knew that there were some problems with the math or the ELA standards. And we can't say anything more because we don't know what the motives were. But we do know that the standards are producing all kinds of interesting problems at the local level because schools and teachers are trying to develop their own curricula to address these standards. And these lessons or materials are bringing a lot of grief to parents all over the country. If you Google or use Facebook, there are many examples, particularly in the elementary grades, of very mathematically sophisticated parents who can't figure out the grade 3 math problem their child is trying to solve. And parents are asking questions and the school authorities can't answer them very well, which raises a different question. If this was to be a transformation of our public schools, why wasn't there better preparation from state departments of education for schools and teachers to be able to explain to these parents? I just came, as I've told a few people, from North Dakota, where I spoke to 2 different roomfuls of parents, mainly. About 150 in Bismarck and 150 in Fargo. I was trying to think of the other name of the town I was in. And the parents are coming from not just the public schools, but homeschoolers who are afraid of what is happening at the high school level, their kids want to go to college, kids in Catholic schools, Lutheran day schools, kids in Christian day schools. Many of them have adopted, for different reasons, Common Core standards, and the parents don't understand why, because all they've heard about is the separation of church and state, so they don't understand why their kids have to have the kind of standards that apparently Mr. Gates, Bill Gates, is not even subjecting his own children to because he sends them to, I guess, the Seattle equivalent of Phillips Exeter, where they will not get a Common Core education. And it just raises a lot of questions in these parents' eyes about why his kids go to a private school with a classical curriculum and all the rest of the kids in the public school get a different kind of curriculum. And for me, it reminds me of 70 years ago, not that I was there looking at it at that time, but one of the big divides was between what was offered in public schools and what was offered in private schools, and how could we make public schools at least offer some of what was in a private school, a good private school, so that students who wanted to could benefit from. And those kinds of courses or offerings And we seem to be going backwards instead of forwards into the 21st century. Now, what did Massachusetts have in mind when it got rid of the standards that you heard me talk about had at least helped Bay State students? It might not have been the only reason, but it certainly was a major reason contributing to Bay State students doing as well as they have done on international and national tests. I have told everybody, and I have never been contradicted by anybody, we knew we were promised $250 million in Race to the Top money. We got it. But that was what was in the works in 2010. The Board of Ed knew it. There was also an understood consensus on the board, coming from the then Secretary of Ed at the time, that there was going to be an adoption of Common Core, and there would be ways found by reports of different kinds to show that Common Core standards were just as good, half a dozen of one, 6 of the other, too close to call kinds of differences between Common Core and our standards. Well, now we find that almost 50% of the schools in Massachusetts want to keep MCAS for another year, not only for graduation requirements and the continuity for the kids who are going to be graduating soon, but also when I found a few local newspaper articles where superintendents talked about what their staff had told them that led them to make the decision whether to stay with PARCC next year, where they have a choice, or to go with MCAS, it turned out that they were getting a lot of negative feedback from their staff. I found that interesting, the local newspaper reports. You don't get it in the Globe, but you do get it at the local level. I don't know what's been in your local newspaper, and I don't know your local newspaper, but I found one for Bridgewater, Rainham, and another small town where the reporters sat in on a school committee meeting and heard the superintendent report why they were making the decision that they had made about whether to continue. It's the only way one gets really bottom level information, and it's too bad we don't have more access to that kind of information. In any event, we now have the situation that was described there. Next year, if the PARCC test is voted upon by the State Board of Ed as the test to give, Massachusetts will be locked in. No more MCAS. So far as I know, the standards that MCAS is now based on are almost all Common Core, but the cut score is, it's the pass score, is Massachusetts. Now, what happens when a pass score has to include Arkansas and Louisiana? That will be next year. If you have a group of states that have to work out a cut score, and Massachusetts is in with a group of states that includes Arkansas and Louisiana, you just guess, where is the cut score going to be for political reasons? We don't know, and we don't know whether the states are going to fight about it. But it's going to be an interesting session next year to find out, if we can, where the pass score is going to be set so that there is one pass score for all of the participating states in a consortium that has had a dwindling number of states participating. That's been the case with the other consortium as well, too. So things are moving slowly, but we don't know what will happen by next year. I'm going to stop now because I think we have a few more remarks from a few other people, and then we'll have open questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Stotsky. Okay, a lot of information. I think at this point, you have a very good idea that this is a multi-headed monster, right? A couple of things that I picked up on trying to be a good note taker, like I tell my kids, right? You have to try to capture the most important information. This new system impacts different grades and different subjects, right? As a history teacher, I'm going to be impacted a little bit different than an English teacher. I'm going to be impacted different than the math curriculum, which is being slowed down and dumbed down. I think that's a good way to put it. Technology is going to be dramatically impacted. We're going to have some handouts at the end of our program, but I thought now might be a good time just to take a couple of minutes. Then we're going to hear from Laina, who's going to give us a parent's perspective on PARCC. But here's some statistics that CommonCoreForum.org has compiled. Massachusetts schools and children who took the PARCC test last year had the following to say. 72% of schools need more devices to test all those students. That is an unfunded technology mandate. 61% of students reported that the math test was more difficult than their schoolwork, 28% for ELA. Only 70% of the students said that the test questions asked those things they had learned in math, 87% for ELA. 41% of the kids said it was hard to type answers for math, especially some of the new and crazy techniques that they are suggesting. 46% of the kids experienced tech-related problems with math, 31% for ELA, and we haven't even talked about the special education department and the IEPs and how you take a school system or district or school and implement those accommodations for those kids who have special needs. A couple more statistics and we'll get to Laina. PARCC stands for the Partnership of Readiness for College and Careers. Isn't that a misnomer? It's a consortium that was funded and formed by the federal government through Race to the Top grant money, one-time grant money at the height of the Great Recession, slipped under the radar to the states to develop a set of assessments aligned with the Common Core state standards. It started in the spring of 2010 with 23 states. Only 13 states remain, representing a dropout rate of almost 50%, President Obama. Now, moving to the PARCC test, and this is what I hear from my fellow teachers, this is what we're hearing from the unions, Worcester being the second largest in the Commonwealth. Moving to the PARCC test will more than double the number of testing sessions and presumably hours for a 3rd and 4th grader in ELA and math. This does not include any test prep time that districts are likely to devote during the school day. Almost 50%, as Dr. Stotsky said, of school districts in Massachusetts did not select the PARCC pilot for the 2014-2015 school year. Let me repeat that again. Almost 50% of our 400+ school districts in Massachusetts did not select the PARCC pilot for the 2014-2015 school year. We have a bifurcated, dysfunctional system, ladies and gentlemen, and our legislators and the next governor, need to be held accountable. 5 of the top 10 public schools in Greater Boston did not choose the PARCC pilot and stuck with MCAS in 2014 as ranked by Boston Magazine. Well, I'll stop there. We'll get the crowd going for Laina, but you can see this is a mess. This is a mess that makes implementation on a public policy level of Obamacare look small potatoes, ladies and gentlemen. And it's only just started. All right, with that, I'd like to turn it over to a parent on the front lines. Laina is from North Reading, and she'll introduce herself and talk about her experiences. She's going to go about 10 or 15 minutes, and then I think it's best to turn it over to questions. That way we can take them one by one. I also want to call up Dave at some point to talk about a school committee's person fighting on the front lines over in Peabody, because, ladies and gentlemen, that's where a lot of our advocacy has to lie. As Dr. Stotsky pointed out, our school committee members are elected by you to represent you, 2/3 of the local school budget or municipal budget, and set school policy on behalf of the superintendent. But before we get to that, let me introduce Laina Simone. It's great to have her.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you. I'm Laina Simone. there for this event as a concerned parent. It might not be the most glamorous job in the world, but I think it's one of the most important. Thank you. Not only do we need to educate ourselves about how wrong PARCC and Common Core are for our children, but we also have a responsibility to educate others in our communities. It's truly a grassroots effort. You may have already heard about Common Core, of course, from Dr. Stotsky. It's been all over the place, but I'm going to talk mostly about PARCC. I've always considered myself to be fairly well-versed in current events, especially those that concern my children. I'm embarrassed to say, though, that although I knew a little bit about Common Core, I didn't know anything about PARCC until a few months ago when the vote was basically right upon my own school district. The first thing I want to talk about, one of my issues with PARCC, is what I call the shroud of secrecy. After speaking with many other parents in North Reading and other communities, I realized that most knew little or nothing about PARCC as well. These are intelligent parents who are really involved in their kids' lives, yet they didn't know the details about the test, they didn't know that we were taking a vote, they didn't even know what PARCC stood for. MCAS for next year. And when I was told from them, the only information I was given was that PARCC was, quote, inevitable, and we might as well jump on the train now or get left behind. My question to them and to everyone here now is, why is the train moving at such lightning speed, especially when there are so many concerns from superintendents, school committee members, parents, teachers? Even the new president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association has called for a 3-year moratorium on PARCC. And I'm pretty sure I heard something about Bill Gates mentioning the same thing. What evidence do we have that MCAS is failing our kids? Why would we take arguably the #1 educational standards in the country and trade them for untested, unproven standards? Now, there's some specific reasons why I think we need to take a step back from PARCC, and the first is financial, and that is a huge one, I think, as Dean mentioned as well. There was an article in the Boston Globe on June 16th of this year that stated that, quote, about 2/3 of Massachusetts schools face a major technological challenge. They lack enough computers, other equipment, or broadband capacity to test large numbers of students online simultaneously, according to a statewide survey by the Mass Department of Ed. North Reading, my community, is one of those communities facing that challenge. We don't have the devices, nor do we have the bandwidth, nor the support staff. I think we maybe have 5 people in all of the district to support all of this technology. In addition, the Pearson loaded software is good for 3 years. So guess what? When those 3 years are up, you need to renew the software. So that results in an ongoing cost for all of these communities. My own town, North Reading, was at a crossroads a few years ago. We have the choice to either renovate our middle school and our high school, which were badly needed, or get the chance to build a brand new middle and high school. We were at the top of the list with Massachusetts. They were going to pay about half of the cost, so we said, okay, let's move forward, and we did. What resulted in, what the result was of that, to the taxpayers, was 2 separate overrides in the amount of $75 million. And as I said to my school committee when they were in the midst of making this decision, we don't have the money. We've gone to the well too many times. I asked one of the school committee members, where's the money coming from? He looked me straight in the eye and said, I don't know. Well, I can tell you where it's going to come from. It'll come from the parent taxpayers via the PTAs and the PTOs, raising funds yet again, donating their time, donating their money. The most important component of PARCC for me, though, is the effect that it's going to have on our children. MCAS is an on-time test. PARCC is a time test, which is administered twice per year, with long-term plans to add 2 additional tests. Not only will the test time itself be doubled, but we have to consider prep time as well. In my own elementary school, my daughter's in 3rd grade. I found out this week that she's going to sit for 11 assessments. 11. These assessments are given throughout the year. Many children, including my older 7th grade daughter, she already has test anxiety. She's not on an IEP. She's not going to get any extra time. What happens to those kids when they're asked to not only endure extra testing, but to have the added stress of the ticking clock? I had a friend of mine when I was talking about this, her 9-year-old son was sitting next to me and he said, Mrs. Simone, but what happens if I'm taking the PARCC test and the computer's slow and I run out of time? What happens indeed? I don't know. And I asked the school committee members that, and again, no answer. In the aforementioned Globe article, there was also a quote from Glenn Kuchar, who's the executive director of the Mass Association of School Committees. He stated, quote, the kids will be traumatized by a user-unfriendly system at a time when they're already under a lot of stress. Perhaps the most stressed students of all, though, will be those whose socioeconomic background doesn't provide them the same access to technology in the homes that many other students have. Even in my home, very comfortable town, we have almost 200 families that utilize the food pantry. Those kids are not going to be coming from homes that have all these devices. That means at best case, those students will have a learning curve in terms of navigating the devices. At worst case, it'll slow them down considerably on a timed test, or they won't understand it at all because it's so different for them. As Dr. Peg Luksik has stated, children of a lower socioeconomic status are more likely to have upheaval in the home as well, which again affects their test-taking abilities. It discriminates before they've even had a chance to start the test. One of the concerns that a lot of the other parents talk to me about, and I'm very concerned about it as well, is the student data. Who owns it and who's getting access to it? My own school committee admitted that their association, the Mass Association, they were stonewalled, that was a direct quote, when trying to find out who owns the student data. Because of recent changes to FERPA, virtually anyone can get access to your children's data without parental consent. And that's the Federal Educational Right to Privacy Act, for those who don't know. The Department of Education also redefined, without congressional approval, quote, authorized representative, end quote, to expand privacy exemptions that have previously protected student privacy under FERPA. These reinterpretations, quote, remove affirmative legal duties for the state and local educational facilities to protect student data. Before, the only individuals that could access the data were people under the direct control of the U.S. Education Secretary or state education representatives. Now, an authorized rep can be anyone, such as another government agency, a foundation, a nonprofit, an individual, a for-profit, a research group. In short, pretty much anybody. As long as the data is released in connection with an audit or an evaluation of a federal or state-sponsored, quote, educational program, no parental consent is required. Just to give you some examples, the Washington State Department of Public Institute signed agreements with the Seattle Times and with the Associated Press to share student data. And they did that by calling themselves research organizations. They got the kids' data. Here's some of the examples of your children's data that are easily accessible. Their names, their addresses, family members' names, their date and place of birth, their grade level, their dates of attendance, pictures of them, participation in activities and sports, student ID numbers, social security numbers, health records. It goes on and on. This also includes biometric data. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that, that includes fingerprints, retina and iris patterns, voice prints, facial characteristics, and handwriting. Now, this may sound absolutely crazy, but there are actually schools out there right now that are having kids put their thumbprint to pay for their lunch, so it's not so far away in the future. You know, we all work so hard to protect our kids, yet school is becoming the place where they're the most vulnerable if all this data is getting out there. You know, Dr. Stotsky and many others have talked about Mitchell Chester and his conflict of interest. Everyone knows it's a conflict of interest whether the state says it or not. I was talking to my kids about it, and I said, that's like telling you guys, okay, I'm going to send you to school. You're going to do all the work, and then you are going to give yourself your grades. Okay? Sound good? I'm sure you're honest kids. I'm sure you're not going to have any bias whatsoever, correct? They laughed at me. As Dean also mentioned, the PARCC consortium, the number of states has dropped. Now, one of the supposed benefits that was talked to about from our technology director in North Reading, one of the benefits of PARCC is the economies of scale. It's so great, there's so many states in there. Well, that kind of goes away when you see all these states dropping out. In fact, the test is listed at PARCC Online as $29.50 per student. That's the original price before all the states had actually dropped out of PARCC. It's an additional $3 to $4 for the paper and pencil test, which is what North Reading will be taking this year, and what many of the districts are opting for. In order to keep their $160 million grant in federal money, PARCC is also supposed to have 15 states. What happens to that money now that the number of states has dropped? So where do we go from here? Again, as I mentioned, full disclosure, North Reading did end up voting PARCC despite my best intentions. While it was a blow, my friend Julie Kopke and I, we got our vote delayed, and we were able to have a standing room only room full of parents show up to the school committee meeting. So there are parents out there that care. The only reason that we weren't able to get more is because of the fact that it was the night before school, and again, nothing was written about it. Nobody knew anything about it. If it weren't for the two of us, nobody would have known that this vote was even coming up. What we need to do, in my opinion, is educate, 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 and that starts with the parents. Personally, I've met with both my elementary and middle school principals and have refused the PARCC test for my children. There's absolutely no reason for my children or anyone else's children to be unpaid guinea pigs for the Pearson company, a private company. This is a good start, but we just can't think of our own children and like articles on Facebook. We really need to get out into the community. Besides talking to our friends, we need to go to town events. We need to take a stand, and we need to get other people to refuse the test as well. If you are not one of those people that wants to get out and do that, just send out some emails to your contact list. Go on to the Common Core Forum, some of the anti-PARCC sites, the anti-Common Core sites. Get a few bullet points and send them along. As far as PARCC being inevitable, which we hear over and over and over, I have to wonder where we would be if the colonists, our American patriots, believed that staying under King George's British rule was inevitable. Their battle was much more daunting than ours. We have the momentum now, we just have to keep up the fight. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Laina. Great job. Okay, we're actually ahead of schedule, ladies and gentlemen, so we'll, in a couple minutes, Scott, go to the Q&A portion, and then at the end, we'll wrap up with some action steps on what we suggest going forward. But I wanted to call Dave up. Dave will pinch hit for Donna, who was delayed from Worcester. Dave McGeady is a member of the Peabody School Committee that will talk about, battling this on the front lines as a real-life school committee member. Dave.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Real close.
This is a great turnout. Thank you all for coming. And as Dean mentioned, I'm a Peabody School Committee member. I'm also the recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Mass Association of School Committee Members. In my real job, I'm the general manager and vice president of a technology company right in the greater Boston area. And as Arnie Duncan likes to refer to me, I'm a white suburban mom. Some of you know what that means. Arnie Duncan, the Secretary of Education, said that the only people who are really against Common Core are white suburban moms who are realizing that their kids aren't quite as bright as they thought they were. Yes, he said that. He said that out loud. And I love this. You mentioned Peg Luxus, who does a lot of touring around in these anti-Common Core venues. She had another great quote. She said, you know, we're going to win this thing in Common Core because dads will die for their children, won't they? Right, dads? But moms will kill. That is so true. I had a teacher who was a real fan of Common Core come up to me and say, you know, Dave, I've read these Common Core standards and I honestly think they're fine. Can you please tell me what it is about the standards that you don't like? And I said, you know, that's the wrong question. The correct question is, what was so wrong with the Massachusetts current standards that it was worth spending $250 million of taxpayers' money to flush it down the toilet? We're #1 in the country. We're #1 on many tests in science, in particular internationally. What is so wrong with our standards? Mitchell Chester's conflict of interest comes up a lot, and I love your analogy. That's great. The analogy that I like to use is, it's almost like putting Mitchell Chester being in charge of deciding whether MCAS or PARCC is, which one is better, is almost like putting Ray Rice in charge of a domestic violence investigation, right? True, you can laugh, it's all right. It's a little irreverent, but so is Mitchell Chester being the chairman of PARCC. PARCC is, it's almost like, he keeps talking about this being a 2-year test drive, right? 2-year test. Well, if this is a 2-year test drive, Mitchell Chester should be arrested for carjacking. Right? This is crazy. This would never happen in real life, in the private sector. You wouldn't have a drug company just immediately say, we have something that we're pretty sure is better than every other treatment for cancer out there. So everybody stop their current treatment and try this. That's in essence what they're doing with Common Core, right? If this was a meeting pro-Common Core, it would last about 5 minutes. It would go something like this. Hi, I'm in favor of Common Core. It'll better prepare kids for college and career, and it's more rigorous than your current standards. The bar is open, have a nice night. That's it. Now, unfortunately, none of that, there is no empirical data anywhere that supports that in truth. I'm going to speak now directly to other school committee members. The 2 reasons I keep hearing more than any others of why some school committees have chosen PARCC over MCAS this year. One is that it's inevitable. It's not. As a matter of fact, there were 25 original states that signed on to PARCC. They're down to 14. This year, less than 25% of the students in the United States will take the PARCC exam, PARCC test. More students will be taking the Smarter Balance test than the PARCC test. Is it better? Is it cheaper? We don't know. More than half of all the students in the country will take neither the PARCC nor Smarter Balance. They'll either take a test of their own or they'll take no test associated with Common Core at all. So PARCC is hardly inevitable. In fact, it's imploding. And the other reason I hear school committee members voting for PARCC is the superintendent recommended it, and we should support the superintendent. Folks, I've been on the school committee for 19 years. This is how it really works. The average superintendent stays in Massachusetts less than 3 years. That's the average. It's been that way a long time. The first year is the honeymoon. The second year, they're actually being held accountable for something. The third year, the resume is on the street. That's just how it is. And these superintendents know if they're going to get another job, they better be seen as progressive. They better not make waves with the DESE. That's just how it is. Bill Belichick has a great line. He really simplifies what makes players great. Just says one thing: do your job. Do your job. School committee members, your job is not to support the superintendent. Your job is to support the children of the districts you represent. Do your job.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we'll go to the Q&A portion, and Scott, I think we've recruited you. We have 2 mics here. We have the that mic there that can work for us if there's questions up there. Can we hear you? Justin. Can we hear Scott? One more time, okay. All right, so we're going to have questions from all of you. There has to be some questions out there. There's a lot of information that we threw at you tonight. Then we'll wrap up with action steps. But one thing that's dawned on me as I heard Dave speak, and you know, I wore many hats for many years. I've been a political activist, I've been a teacher. Usually you go back and forth, right? Like some of my fellow colleagues, but this is not a done deal. If anything, it's going to usher in perhaps a long overdue debate on the future of high stakes testing. And it's coming from both the political left and the political right. We have a lot of members across the political spectrum. Just last week, the Worcester Teachers Union, I forget their formal name, voted to reprimand the school committee in adopting or trying to adopt PARCC, and they have, in effect, voted for a 3-year pause on PARCC and a call for a reevaluation of high-stakes testing. That's over 2,000 teachers in the city of Worcester, which isn't exactly Iowa or Kansas on the political spectrum. So we also, it was noted, I think, by Laina, that the newly elected Massachusetts Teachers Association president ran on a platform against PARCC and Common Core, calling for a reevaluation of high-stakes testing. This issue is creating a coalition across the spectrum. So we'll get to that when we go to our action steps. So with that, we'll open up the floor and have questions. All right, Scott, you're going to get a word in.
Okay. Scott, right
Hi, Lena.
Yes.
You said that it was possible to remove your own children from the PARCC testing. Can you explain how that works to us?
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Very easily. You can...
Oh, yeah, sorry.
It's that one because of the laptop. Keep that.
I can speak very, very
No,
loudly.
anything, sign it that says that you, as a parent, are deciding to have your child not take the PARCC test. You're refusing the PARCC test. You can use the words opt out. I prefer refuse, personally. I have good relationships with my principals, so I did sit down with them first, and I met with them, just to let them know that I would be submitting this letter. We have a copy of them, I think, on the Common Core Forum website. There is a sample letter that parents can use if they want to, but that's it. You
So-
just submit a letter. That's it.
Are the kids tested in any manner after that, or is there an alternative plan?
No, well, what's going to happen with my children, I talked with both of the principals. I think it's up to whatever the principal decides to do, but for my children, they'll just go to the library, they'll read a book, whatever. There's not anything specific. They don't make them sit down and stare at the test or anything like that. Believe me, they have plenty of assessments. As I mentioned, my 3rd grader has 11 assessments, so she's going to be tested, just not for PARCC.
I think the other point to keep in mind is for 2014, 2015, PARCC is hold harmless, right? It's basically a pilot. It is not counted. It doesn't assess a school district. It's basically a rollout of a pilot exam. So any parent that wants to opt their children out, they should feel that their child is not going to be penalized negatively.
And I'd like to also add that one of our school committee members called it, quote, a glorified trial test, so I didn't see any reason why my kids should do that.
I don't know. I'd just like to add something more to what I said earlier, because I think it may be useful for parents in any particular school district to approach their school committee members and ask if they can set a consistent policy for what should take place for students who are opted out. I think that one important recommendation would be to request instructional time in school. Many parents work, both of them, so they may want their child to go to school, but there is no reason why the school could not tell the school authorities, the administrators, that they would like instructional time that's appropriate arranged for students who aren't taking the test to make up for some of the teaching time that they will not have.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, it's estimated that PARCC, as it's currently administered, is over 9 days of school time, right? Yeah. Right here in the front? Yes.
I have a question for Dr. Stotsky. Dr. Stotsky, if, theoretically speaking, if we were to eliminate Common Core and go back to MCAS standards, what would be the recommendation in terms of improving upon MCAS? If there's a potential for going backward in time from this present day to what was better, I would certainly like to hear it. And by the way, my 5th grade grandson was opted out of PARCC testing. I was the one who informed the school principal that the opt-out option was legal and available in Saugus, Massachusetts. And in addition to that, that child sat in the classroom while everyone took the test except him and was made to read a book. So I can't agree more with your suggestion about going to the school committees and coming up with an alternative plan for the children. Kudos to you.
Let me suggest that it wouldn't be going backward. Here in Massachusetts, we could easily, because I know what's going on in several other states, writing bills, and there are several different models about what they want to do in the interim while they develop their own first-class set of standards. What I call it the Oklahoma model versus the Ohio model, but there are differences in what they want teachers to do once they try to get rid of Common Core as a set of standards. The first thing is to declare a moratorium on any Common Core based testing, and it's not just PARCC or Smart Balance, could be others. So one has to first declare the moratorium on the testing, which will sort of put nails in the coffin if it goes through. Then one, in this particular state, it's easier to say we would like to return to a form of the standards we had, but we were on the verge of revising our own standards in math and English back in '08. I was a part of the effort, actually, with ELA, and it was coming out much better, and there were improvements in the math as well that were being made. Both of those draft sets of standards were put on the shelf. They never went anywhere because Common Core came down the pike, so nothing, they were deliberately cast aside. But both of those documents were better than the earlier documents that had been in place here for 8 to 9 years or so. So what we would simply go back to is the cycle that was already there, that is already in the Massachusetts Ed Reform Act. On a timely basis, you revise your standards. We can't revise Common Core. They're copyrighted, and there's no mechanism for revising them. And we can't do it solo anyway. So we would be in a much better position to say we return to the standards we had while we have committees to continue with the drafting and the revising through the public process that we already have had for so many times.
I actually have two questions. One is trying to wrap my arms around the possibility that the Common Core PARCC came about with the purest of motives, possibly diminishing the achievement gap. There's got to be some initial numbers out there as to how successful Common Core standards and those states that have participated in the PARCC pilot, where we now stand with the achievement gap. I work for the state. I work in child protection. I think I know what the achievement gap is, and I don't think that PARCC's going to change it. But I'm just curious as to whether there are any preliminary numbers out there with where we stand in our achievement gap. And then back to, I know it was said earlier about special ed. I work closely with someone from Duke University around executive functioning, working memory issues, and it's estimated that 15% of every classroom has children with some degree of executive functioning and working memory. And I'm wondering if anybody knows, possibly we probably don't, where Common Core is accommodating those general ed students, but with this executive functioning piece. And possibly it's not a question that has an answer yet, but that would disappoint me even more.
The last part of what you asked about, a lot of concerns have been raised, and we really don't know what the U.S. Secretary of Education wants to do about children with IEPs or special ed. There is a sense that the schools are to aim for the median and ignore by simply not paying attention to those who are well below or those who are above. It's a rather egalitarian approach to grade level achievement. And in that sense, the achievement gap, which is your first point, is to be addressed. It will reduce variation in achievement, which is what they seem to admire mostly about Finland, because that was what seemed to come out of the reforms in Finland, that variation in overall achievement was reduced by the reforms that they did and their compulsory education ended in grade 9, and they purposely made sure that there were opportunities for students to choose the type of high school they want. The American model is far more restrictive and narrower than even the best of other models that have been reformed models for schooling. So we have some serious discussions that need to take place about how you reduce variation and in what way, and what options you allow students, as in most other countries, after a certain grade level, to choose the kind of curriculum they want for their own interests, which motivate young adolescents. And we know that from our own regional voc tech schools, for example, students can enter from grade 8 into these 9 to 12 schools. We have waiting lists in many of them, and in most European countries, they probably enroll over 50% at least of the students who go on to high school. The number who go into academic high schools is a much lower level. But this is by choice, and schools also in many of these countries have tried to make sure that the basic coursework is the same. So if students want to go on to college afterwards, they can. They're not stuck in a track. They're not dumping grounds, and this becomes important to work out as well.
One quick point about special ed. It seems to me, and we should say the Common Core Forum and the group of us do support a pause on PARCC. If for nothing else, to call out the special educators and bring them into the conversation as to what their plans are going to be. Based on my own experience and recollection, it took a long time for the MCAS to be integrated into the special ed programs, and special ed administrators, school district by school district, working with the team of educators. That didn't just happen overnight. The Ed Reform Act passed in '93. It was implemented shortly thereafter. It took consecutive amount of school years for school departments and special educators to work with regular teachers on coming up with sufficient accommodations for children with special needs.
Yes, I'm curious about if our college and university system has made their views known about Common Core, being that they're the ones that will have to accept these students that are, quote, slowed down and dumbed down.
The college system in general in this country has more or less been out to lunch. They really haven't known what was going to happen. A key piece of Common Core that's built into the Race to the Top application material required chancellors or presidents of higher ed to sign on and to agree that students who pass the grade 11 college readiness test would be eligible for credit-bearing coursework in their freshman year. That was the major link. That's why these standards are called college readiness standards. We've never had them before. And this is a link that was never explained, according to Professor Milgram, as far as mathematicians he knew across the country, in most departments of mathematics, because that is where math is taught, whether it's in a community college or in a department of mathematics in an arts and science college. So it remains to be seen what is going to happen when they have to be, when the teaching faculty have to start making adjustments for students who have been deemed college ready on a grade 11 test, which we have no idea about right now because the tests haven't been finalized and we don't know where the cut score is going to be. So this remains a work in progress, but one can hypothesize that the level of the courses that will be college credit bearing will have to be a little higher than whatever the college readiness level pass score was. And the students will probably have to be retained because of the emphasis on retention. So what that does to the departments, to the level of math, and to whether you can have all students who are eligible for these courses taking them for credit, we don't know. It's, as I say, a work in progress. And there are a lot more questions about what will happen to the entire higher ed system?
Good evening. Thank you very much for taking the time and effort to put this on. I'm a grandparent, and the talk about testing actually means very little to me. What concerns me the most is what is different. What is being taught now that is different in the Common Core curriculum than what's being taught today that goes to the testing scenario? That, to me, would be is the major concern, I think, of most of the parents in here. What's being taught that's different to make them pass this other testing scenario? That's critical, in my opinion. The scoring, to me, means really very little. How are they getting there? That's the question. Thank you.
In English, there are some differences in the kind of curriculum that is either implied or, as superintendents may say, mandated by the standards themselves. There will be more informational text. There may be more time on certain works in the name of supposedly developing critical thinking. There are some goals built in. How they are actually achieved will depend to a large extent on the teachers in the school and the directions they get. It will also reflect what advice they are given from people who may be called Common Core consultants. This is still not clear, but there are many concerns that parents are raising about the differences in approach in elementary math because there are specific things that are being laid out for teachers to do, and the pedagogy is built into the standards in math, even though there are many people saying they're simply standards, it's not curriculum, it's not pedagogy, but many of the standards contain the pedagogy that the teacher is to use. That is why there's an enormous amount of professional development that is now being required for teachers in many places, particularly elementary, to learn how to teach to Common Core standards. The differences at the high school level will again also depend upon, to some extent, the teachers who are there, some of whom may be retiring soon, but in math, they may be teaching what was listed for the grade level that today may be at a lower grade level. In other words, some things were deferred. They were bumped up to a higher grade level. So it's a lowering of the academic level of the high school math and then science curriculum, because science will piggyback on the math. And if, as some people have said, if the last course in the math sequence in Common Core is a weak Algebra 2, which is how it is described by many people, including mathematicians, certain topics will not be taught that are currently taught. They may continue to be taught if the teacher has been teaching and is not a new teacher and knows that this is what the students need in order to get to a pre-calculus course. It's going to be a lot of different variations for a while, but the tests themselves will only test what is in the standards. So if the standards are delineating topics that have been at a lower level, or certain topics that may not have been there at all but are now being stressed more, that is what the teachers are going to want to teach because they will be evaluated against it. It's a system that is trying to get all the teachers on board to teach to the same curriculum materials ultimately. That is partly what's being developed. And frankly, for many parents and teachers, it sounds frightening. There are scripts that come with some of these materials at different grade levels. But I haven't seen them. I only am hearing either teachers or parents reporting on the scripts they are being given in their professional development workshops. You would have to speak to individual teachers to see if they're willing to tell you what they see as different from whatever they did. And it will vary from school to school.
I guess just a quick follow-up there. I've been told that in history, for instance, we're no longer teaching the children that our founding fathers even existed. These are the kind of things that are critically important in this whole thing. I don't care about the testing. I care about what they're being taught. And if this Common Core thing brings that kind of change in the educational system, that's devastating and incredibly important.
History
More
is
than
very
testing.
fragile, but the history is not Common Core. We have to remember that Common Core is either English or math. Now, it has something called literacy standards that apply outside to science, history, and other areas in the curriculum, including music. But I think you may be referring to the latest flap about the AP, Advanced Placement U.S. History syllabus, which has just undergone a major revision, and Texas, as a state, has just passed a law that curbs the use of this particular course in its high schools. It has received serious criticism from historians and others. There are some problems, and the person who's the president of College Board, David Coleman, was to get right. It's hard to disentangle them, but the problem with the AP is that they are being changed and aligned downward to the level of Common Core. Where they're going yet, it's hard to see. AP U.S. History, APUSH as it's called, has just been released. That's why we know what's in it, except that we often don't know what's in the test because they won't release the test. And the teachers who are participating in the workshops for the AP course are being told they can't talk about it to anybody. There are unusual kinds of secrecy. You may know more about it because we're hearing that any AP teacher who was in an APUSH workshop has been sworn to secrecy about whatever they've been taught. It just raises questions.
There's a lot of questions, and I think the one common denominator that we always go back to is process. Right, where have we seen this before? Where have we seen this movie before, right? Where you have meetings that aren't public, where top-down policy is being handed out, where things that are being discussed and implemented aren't coming from the bottom up, right? If you're going to have changes to the history curriculum or the Common Core, that should start locally and move its way up. I mean, we're seeing a very top-down approach in many, many areas. And that is why you're seeing the blowback from the teachers' unions, right? We're on the front lines. We're getting handed this. We're losing instruction time. It's affecting sequencing, as Dr. Stotsky has pointed out. And let's just say, as a history teacher, it indirectly impacts me. If you have a community whose technology budget is dramatically impacted by a new high-stakes exam, that's going to affect hiring, it's going to affect promotions, it's going to affect professional development. It's going to open up a whole can of worms financially that's going to impact both the school district and property tax payers.
I just wanted to add one more answer to you. I have two daughters. One's in 7th grade and one's in 3rd grade. And I have seen the homework that's come home. They don't teach the kids just 9 + 2 = 11. There are 15 more steps that you have to do in order to achieve that answer to be considered having correct homework. Now, my 7th grade daughter just took a special math exam. And that math exam was the one that Dr. Stotsky had mentioned, where you either get in the special math class, 18 children got in that class, and they are on the path to be able to get to pre-cal. All the rest of the kids are not. So that's what's happening from the parental standpoint for the children.
And that is just not going to fly in many of our high-performing school districts. That could be Metro West, that could be up here in the North Shore, that could be down the Cape. That is not going to fly. When parents find out that some of their children, or in forms of enrichment, are going to slow them down, you're going to hear loud cries from the mountaintops, because we have a system here in Massachusetts that's supposed to be built on excellence, that we try to go further, that we are #1 in the country in many assessments already. When the information gets out that many students who are performing well cannot go further or have their studies impacted, that's going to create a whole other can of worms. You know, so you have students impacted on the lower end of the scale, you're going to have students impacted dramatically on the higher end as well.
I'd like to speak a little bit about trends in education. I'm a retired kindergarten teacher, and I've seen since the 70s many movements sweep back and forth, with pendulum swinging back and forth. That seems to be one of the things that happens in our education system. Somebody at the top gets an idea. Here's the new thing, let's go. Drop all that, that's no good anymore. Now we're going to do this, and now we're going to do that. And what happens is a lot of education is, first of all, a very complex process. It's not easily measured. It's not easily assessed just with one little number that tells you how you're doing. For example, do any of these standardized tests effectively assess how well the kids cooperate with each other? If you're putting more emphasis on this test, do you think the teachers are going to be spending more or less time on helping the kids to be cooperative with each other? If a principal who is changing schools every few years.
What's the question?
Well, I'm asking a question. Wasn't that a question that I asked? If a principal is changing schools every few years and going on to the next step, what's going to make that principal's resume look good? Oh, well, I changed this program. I changed that program. I introduced this. I did that. Meanwhile, the teachers, here comes another principal, here comes another program, drop everything you've been working on to refine and do well, and now you do something new. So think very hard about what it is you're creating in the process and what you're causing teachers to drop just because they've got to look good for this new suit they've got to wear.
You know, the idea that national education policy is on a pendulum is a very good point, because we've seen this before, haven't we? No Child Left Behind, Goals 2000. What makes this different, and I'd love to get Dr. Stotsky's opinion on this, is that the federal government and some of the federal government have gone a step further. They've gone to the localities in a dramatic reversal of federalism and the 10th Amendment, and have said to states and localities, this is going to be the curriculum. This is going to be the way forward. And traditionally, historically, education has always been a local issue. We have Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal. Now, he might be running for president, he might be doing this for political reasons, but he is making a constitutional argument under the 10th Amendment that Common Core is illegal, that it's gone too far, that it's going over from the advisory role or the suggested role for standards and now to the compulsory part of the equation. And that's a very, very big precedent. So where that ends up, how that lawsuit impacts the Commonwealth of Massachusetts remains to be seen. But what I think it's going to do is force all of us to come back here again, working with school committee members and the legislature and the new governor in coming up with a way out of this madness, coming up with a better system that works, built on maybe what's worked for Massachusetts. So, Dr. Sandy?
There is a serious top-down, as you're mentioning it, attitude about what the USED would like to see happening at the state level. And there have been lawyers who've looked at constitutional amendments, and they indeed have concluded that there are violations of at least 3 constitutional amendments that the Common Core project has been guilty of. But there's a different problem. They're trying to figure out in their minds that they want to equalize expectations across the country for academic work. Now remember, we have had each state with its own set of standards. That was No Child Left Behind. And supposedly each state was equalizing academic expectations. That's what we were doing here in Massachusetts. But many states were doing it badly. And the idea was that somehow the federal government was going to be doing it at a much higher level and better for most states. Now, it wouldn't do the best thing for the best states. They would have to be coming down a notch, but for most of the states it would be better. But there are states that don't like, and I was in one recently, North Dakota, that I mentioned, but there are others that don't like any strings attached whatsoever. And they're discovering, as over 25 states are, that they can't get out of Common Core. So if this is supposedly a state-led initiative, how come they can't get out of this state-led initiative and do something on their own that at least provides the right safeguards for all their students? So these are discussions that need to take place, if not at the legislative level, at least at local school levels, and they weren't taking place when Common Core came in. This is 5 years down the pipe. They are just beginning now, and that is why we're seeing this great ferment in the past year, because discussions that were deliberately brushed under the rug, they did not want deliberative discussions about what does college readiness mean 5 years ago. Now people are beginning to see that there are tentacles that are maybe potentially dangerous. They don't like them. Parents have lost input. But it requires shifting what most people want to do. Most people don't want to pay much attention to what their local schools are doing. We have very few people who show up for back-to-school nights, or PTO meetings, PTA meetings. And we have school boards that all over the country expect the superintendent to tell them what they should do. And now we've got to reverse and go back to the original role, which is that school boards are supposed to be able to tell their school staff what they want because they are representing the parents who elected them. It's going to take a lot to undo the damage, but this has been a wake-up call to a lot of people because there's been overreach in a lot of ways. But unless people are willing to spend more time looking at understanding this, it's going to make a lot of people look as if they have conspiracy theories, or they're riding around in black helicopters, or doing something that makes them look suspect in the eyes of the many people who don't want to be paying that much attention to what's going on in the schools. So we have some serious public discussions that need to take place under the auspices of general school boards, and they're not doing it.
I mean, this has really opened up Pandora's box because we're talking about multiple grade levels, we're talking about multiple subjects, we're talking about multiple states, we're talking about public money, and this is only the beginning. If anything, hopefully what our work in a short amount of time has done is to try to get people involved to come back to those meetings that we're going to have in the future to come up with a better system, to come up with a system that is bottom-up, that has everyone involved, all the stakeholders from the very beginning. That's what public policy, the way I was taught in my program at Northeastern, was supposed to be about, that you involve everyone from the beginning, that you work with local officials, that you work with teachers and parents in the beginning to come up with something, not after the fact. Now, we're going to wrap up, but I wanted to go back real quick to one question about the differences. What are the differences that we're finding out? Well, in math, we already suggested that it's slowing down the sequence of courses at the secondary level, that the pathways to higher STEM courses is now limited. In English, we're moving away from classic literature and curriculum to more informational texts. In history, we're dealing with a situation where we're moving away from American exceptionalism and America's unique place in the world to whatever David Coleman wants and the special interests cook out of Washington, D.C. On technology, we have determined and proven that the unfunded mandate that's coming with this online exam is going to cost people money. It's going to cost school districts money, and that's going to create layoffs. So those are 4 or 5 specific examples that this experiment is doing to the Massachusetts schools, which has already been #1 for many, many years. Why change the system, as Dave McGeaney said, that wasn't broken, that was leading the nation? So we're getting to the end. What now? We've given the information. We've talked about the current state of policy, both at the federal and state level. What do we do? Well, we need to support more Lainas of the world. We know that. She did an outstanding job tonight. A round of applause for her. As some of our questioners and speakers have said, we need to involve and engage new people, right? We need to go new places and talk to them, ask them their experiences. If we talk to each other on Facebook, that's important, but we have to talk to the people we don't know on Facebook. We have to go to the PTO members that we haven't talked to yet. We have to go to those legislators who don't take hard votes, who very oftentimes don't have an opponent in many districts, and ask them what their opinion on this is. We have to promote our website, commoncoreforum.org, and we send it out to our email list. We have to ask people to go to those school committee meetings and ask the members, what's their plan for special ed? What do the special ed professionals think of this? Right? We have to go to those congressmen, our 9-member congressional delegation, and engage them in a conversation on Common Core. It's been said recently that this issue doesn't poll very high, right? Well, we have 2 candidates for governor that are in a very close race. We already know that their appointments to the Department of Education coming up in their tenure will have a dramatic impact on implementation of this or whatever alternative is going to come up. What are Martha Coakley and Charlie Baker's ideas, plans, and future ideas on Common Core? That's something I think it's fair to ask them, right? That's important. That election is going to be important for Massachusetts. Those are some of our ideas in terms of action steps. For the North Shore, I think it's important to have another informational forum here in Essex County. Essex County has many, many good schools, and thank you very much for having the first one. We need to have future forums and invite other members to come. Dave has suggested in meetings past is that we have to engage the Department of Ed and invite them out to meetings like this. We keep inviting them, they keep not showing up. Their headquarters in Malden, Mass. Give them a phone call. Call your Department of Education, or now it's called the Department of Secondary and Elementary Education. If the politicians think they change the name of the agencies and move a couple of organizational charts around, they call that reform. That's not reform. You owe them a phone call. They're your elected representatives and appointed representatives. Lastly, we will have future forums, so you need to join our mailing list. I'd like to ask, do we have a sign-in sheet from tonight? I just want, okay. So maybe on the way out, we would ask to get your information and set up a sign-in sheet. We want to continue the conversation. I think that's very important. We want to give you information on future events that are happening. This has been a very successful night. You know, we've only been in existence since the summer. A group of us that banded together from all parts of the state that come from different backgrounds. A round of applause for Michael Gendre, Professor Gendre from Middlesex Community College, who's our filmmaker, our audio-visual expert. Scott, thank you, and for your colleagues up here on the North Shore. You know, all of us have a vast network, right? We all have contacts in other parts of the state. I mean, we wonder, how tragic it is that other parts of the state have not even had a meeting like we have. That their schools are going to be impacted in such a profound way, and many of them, as Laina said, don't even know yet. They'll bring the homework home. Some of the students will be tired out over the 9+ days of testing. So getting the word out and being proactive is the way to go. Sir, final question.
Quick and easy. I'm just curious the amount of people that here. Who's actually like the board of selectmen or a school committee, or who's just the parent that's here? Well, like, just a show of hands.
Yeah, show of hands, show of hands.
My kids are in college, so I only have to foot the bill, so.
Okay, how many parents do we have here? Okay. Grandparents? Grandparents and parents. Okay, so all of you are going to know others in your situation. You can network to them. You can tell them about our website. You can tell them basically that we're entering a very large experiment, right? That the country is undertaking, and we're talking about the future of our kids. The other thing that's been fascinating to see is now the teachers' unions are finally getting more involved. They're getting more loud. The Worcester vote was significant because the second largest teachers' union has gone on record saying we have to have a pause on this. You should know the Common Core Forum supports a 3-year pause on PARCC. That will be something at the state level you can advocate to legislators to say, hey, let's put the brakes on this. You know? If this is such a fantastic scheme, prove it. Show us how. What do you feel about this, Mr. Legislator? As Sandy pointed out, the biggest difference between this thing and the 93 Ed Reform Act is the legislature voted on that back in the 1990s. There were public hearings, there was debate, there was Governor Weld was involved, Senate President Birmingham was involved. This thing was rolled out in the secrecy of night, and that has to be stopped. So with that, I want to thank everyone. Please sign out on your way out, and we'll thank you at a